Welcome to The Edge, a podcast from the Bluntness, where we unpack real-world experiences and expertise from seasoned and successful cannabis professionals. I'm your host, Harrison Wise, founder and publisher of The Bluntness. Today's guest is Jesse Campoamor, a veteran political operative from the state of New York, with more than a decade of experience in labor, private sector, and government work. Please welcome Jesse Campoamor, the founder and CEO of Campoarmor Sons, to The Edge. Hey, Jesse.
Hey, Harrison. So good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. It's great to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's just start at the top. I'm sure you need no introduction. If people from the New York cannabis industry are tuning in, they already know who you are. But for those that aren't privileged to kind of see how you operate in this market, to give us a little bit of background.
So I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised in New York City. Lived in Manhattan my whole life. Went to school in the city, and now raising my 6-year-old son and my family in the city. I spent my whole life. I come from a family where we say fighting for the underdog is the family business. I started my career in the labor movement, spent roughly 10 years working for 1199 SEIU, with a healthcare workers union, as a political organizer. Spent some time working in the government, both in the city and the state, working as a senior advisor and director of community affairs for the controller of New York City, Scott Stringer. Did a little stint for Capolino and Company, a private municipal lobbying firm, one of the largest lobbying firms in New York, and one of the largest municipal lobbying firms in the country. And then I did a 2-year stint with our governor, 6 months before the pandemic started. He asked me to join on. And part of my portfolio we agreed on was to help get the adult use cannabis legislation over the finish line. Now it's 6 months before the pandemic, and so we all got thrown in head first, and part of my job was to get shots in arms for Black and Brown and the Vaccine Equity Task Force. But the cannabis conversation, continued to progress through that whole ordeal, and actually played a role in helping us to get over the finish line in some ways. We can talk about that later. But did that for 2 years. Was really proud of the work that we did, both in the field on the vaccine effort, but also getting this piece of legislation done. Now in the private sector, working with clients throughout the whole sector, navigating this regulatory process, right? I call myself a Sherpa, right? You want to go to the mountaintop, come get on my back, and I will help you navigate this regulatory forest, if you will. And so that's going pretty well. We're having fun. It's it's the beginning of a new industry, this nascent industry across the country. And you've been involved with for almost a decade now, right? But for us New Yorkers, the legal part of this is pretty brand new.
Yeah, so my agency and we've done work in cannabis, mostly on the West Coast, and then CBD nationally. But yeah, it's great to see this finally happen in my home state as well, and it is an exciting time. And I guess one question I have for you: where is the action these days? Is it downstate, upstate? And I think New Yorkers don't call New York City downstate, so I'm kind of using the Albany term. But yeah, where is in terms of your client base and where you're spending most of your time? Where's sort of the hub of activity?
I've been always fascinated with so many different elements of this industry, right? We talk about the auxiliary part of the industry, the non-plant touching opportunities, the construction involved in the build-outs, the security and protecting the spaces, the lawyer, right? There's all these opportunities that have nothing to do with touching the plant. But then there's actually the market. There's the part of providing the actual flower, the biomass, the cultivation, and then the retail side, right? And so I've found a way artfully to, as best as possible, have a role in each one of these parts, right? I'm working with some folks that are part of the build out of these stores. I'm working with applicants that have just that are waiting to hear back from OCM about winning a CUARD license, right? This is the conditional adult use retail dispensary. And then there's some bigger players that are hoping to see what happens in the market with the potential expansion of the medical program, and some other opportunities that will come online that they'd be interested in participating in New York on. So, on a personal level, my desire was to make sure that those that were most impacted by the war on drugs had an opportunity to benefit from the wealth creation of the commercialization of that same industry. And that's been a core purpose, something that I believe in, but I think it's good business. Because in New York, some of these guys, the level of creativity, the depth of understanding of the consumer is a real value add. Now, there's still challenges bringing them into a compliant legal market. and that's where we have to support those guys. But that's where I see my role being most of a value add, and where I've really tried to spend a lot of my time.
And how do you think we're doing? How do you think New York State's doing?
Look, I think we're off to New York State and New Yorkers have this, we want everything in a New York minute, right? But you, Harrison, you've seen what's happened across the country, right? Like most states, when they passed the law, it took them 24 months, right? Up to 24 months once they passed the law to get regulations ratified, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're coming up to our 2-year anniversary, but we already have over 300 cultivators in the market, 20 plus processors. And in April, end of this month, we're about to announce close to 300 dispensaries of people that were justice involved, meaning they were convicted for cannabis and had a business that was at least 10% of a business that showed profitability for 2 years. I mean, that already beats, from a social equity perspective, we already beat the rest of the country, right? Like Massachusetts, I think, has 256 social equity licenses approved, but only like less than 90 even up and running.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to get financed. I mean, the thing is, again, we're learning so much in the process, right? Because we're in uncharted territory. And so, look, I think there's some people out there that are saying we're not going fast enough. We need to go faster. There's only 4 stores open. If you talk to cultivators, some of them, you might hear frustration that there's not enough output. But people need to be reminded we're in the beginning of a new market.
Right.
A couple of months from now, we won't remember this stuff, right? And there was an intentionality in New York, unlike the rest of the states, to really get the social justice issue and the harms that were created by the war on drugs right. And that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. But if people believe in that mission, they believe in the cause, I think they just have to, be a little bit more patient and stick to the program. That being said, we still have a lot more work to do. But I'm optimistic and proud of what's been done so far, and I know we got a lot more work to do ahead of us.
Yeah, I forgot where I read it, but I think you mentioned in an interview somewhere that that there's supply constraints versus a lack of distribution channels. Would that still be true? Would that still hold true today?
Look, I mean, there's 4 stores, give or take, there's 4 legal stores right now, right? Depending on who you talk to, roughly 10,000 consumable pounds of flour were brought into the market, right? A lot of the flour, this is the first round of growing, as you know.
Yeah.
It takes a while for farmers to dial in on this stuff. Mm-hmm. So 90% of the stuff being grown is just biomass, right? It's not even smokable flour.
Right.
Right. And it's going to take a while for guys to dial in on that. And so, I think the farmers will tell you there's not enough output, right? They'd like to be able to get more of their flour off the shelf, out of their storage onto shelves. But, we're still, but that will change quickly, right? And so I think there needs to be a little bit more patience along everybody's side, but also understanding there are impacts to businesses that are realities, right? Storing product costs money. Like the waiting for product to go from their places to the dispensaries cost money. And so I think all this will solve itself out. But we're in such an early phase, right? Such a beginning phase of this thing. So, New York will be a supply constrained state for a while.
Yeah.
Right. That's just a reality of a market that creates a limited license program. But when we were looking at the rest of the country and saw what happened in Oregon, where there are warehouses of weed, just stacking up, collecting dust because they said anybody can grow. We said, okay, we have to be sensitive to that and try to find that balance. And it takes a while. It takes a while to figure out, okay, maybe we're growing too much. We got to take some more off the market, or we're not growing more. We got to increase our growth.
Right.
And that's finding that Goldilocks zone.
And do you think that these type of issues will be sort of the catalyst for interstate commerce? Or is it inter or intrastate commerce?
Interesting. I love that question. Look, that's such an interesting question, and there's so many implications to that. Look, taking a step back, right? You think about bourbon. We don't make bourbon in 50 states in America, right? Like the idea that every state has to manufacture cannabis just doesn't make sense.
Right.
From a national perspective, yeah, the West Coast, Oregon, those guys would love and are chomping on the bit for that to happen, right? But for guys in New York that currently have to depend on New York grown product to be part of the market, they have tough decisions to make because they have to think in 5 to 10 years from now when the borders come down and I'm competing with Oregon, Oklahoma.
And, is it Toklahoma or Smokelahoma? There's a couple of different taglines.
Well, it's a wild, wild west down there, boy. But, you know, we're competing with those markets that are growing, you know, product potentially at the same potency, same quality for a lower price point, right? At that point, businesses and business owners have a different consideration, and it's about the real estate that they've acquired as part of that deal, right? And so, you know, how do you know, people now are thinking, I want to be part of this market. How do I enter this market? What is the market going to look like in the first 3 years, the first 5, right? These are all important business decisions. But yes, I think there is a world eventually where interstate is part of this industry. I think that's a good thing, but there will also be some casualties as part of that as well. And so, you know, I think we all need to be very thoughtful and not think about the immediate, you know, next year, the next 2 years. Think about 5, 10 years down the road. Yeah. That's because, you know, it's going to happen. It's inevitable. I mean, what happens when this becomes international?
Right. Right.
Right. Because in Colombia, right, the country, this is growing by the hectare.
That's right.
Right?
Jamaica, Colombia. Yeah, it's happening. It's happening.
Insane. And they're doing business with each other already.
Yep.
You know this all. And so this is where, you know, again, we're catching up, we're learning. But this is New York. This is the financial and cultural capital of the world. We have some of the best academic institutions, some of the best financial institutions. I can't think, and some of the most amazing cultural individuals in the world. I can't believe that, like, once New York, you know, starts to dial in, we're gonna develop products that will have international appeal. This will be a place where people come from around the world to experience what New York is with cannabis, and I can't wait for that.
And the nightlife. I'm waiting for the nightlife part, the experiential pieces. Yeah.
The Bud Life, we call it. That's what, you know, we're trying to like play with words, but like, yes, the nightlife. Exactly. You're absolutely right.
I mean, we always smoked weed in the club when I was growing up. So I mean, it was never really a detriment. It was just like, you know, just don't get caught, but it was always happening, you know.
You gotta throw the bouncer on the next 100.
That's right.
Oh, man.
So let me ask you an interesting question. So I think most people have a perception of New York politics from watching the show Billions, right? Where Chuck Rhodes with all his back alley dealing, mudslinging, favor trading, or even like House of Cards on more of a national level. Is that how New York politics works?
Oh man, so it's about the state, right? Because I think that people need to understand that our systems are bifurcated. We have a state political government, and we have a municipal government for New York City. Cannabis was passed by our state government, right, and is regulated and controlled by our state government. You know, when you talk about New York State politics, New York State government, you know, commonly it's said it's one of the most dysfunctional political systems in the country. And then you have Illinois, right, where like governors are getting arrested every 2 years. But, you know, New York State politics, you have to understand what we talk about is we call 3 men in a room. And that's changed now because the players are no longer just men, which is amazing, right? And it talks about our progress. But the way our state's political structure really works is the governor, the leader of the Senate, and the leader of the assembly sit in a room and then make decisions about the whole state, right? New York State is a state that we use our budget process to pass our major legislation. It's not unique to New York, but it's something that New York does and something that New York does here. And so those 3 individuals really have all the power, and that can feel alienating. It can feel exclusive to other people. It can feel like this makes no sense. Like we talk about a democracy, and at the end of the day, it's 3 people making all the decisions. But that's how our system works. And it's worked so far in a lot of ways, and in other ways, there's some voices that have been marginalized in that process. When it's come to cannabis, we've had leadership in the Assembly and the Senate that have really understood the core issues on when it comes to cannabis. New York State was driven by leaders like Andrew Stewart Cousins, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, Liz Kruger, who really focused on the health component, but also on the social justice component. And you know, like you've seen other states, you know, social equity was almost treated like a stepchild in cannabis. In New York, we had elected leaders and advocates that just would never let that happen. And I saw that every day, you know, as a member of the governor's staff, the senior staff, dealing with stakeholders on cannabis every day. Everyone walked in with a social narrative equity. Like they knew if they wanted to engage the state, they had to connect with us, and they knew that was a priority. And I think that's a true testament to the leadership of our political leaders and to the staff of the governor's office that made it clear, like, social equity is important to us. You want to do business in New York, you better figure out how to get on board, be part of the program.
True. It's interesting you bring up social equity because and I know there's no perfect solution, but I was talking to Steph V from CERTS at the Revelry conference, and
Nice.
you know his perspective in some regards is around sort of defining the degree of what social equity means, right? He's an OG. He's been at this for nearly 3 decades. He's done some serious time for it. For him, that's the bar, right? Versus the weekend warriors who may have gotten, like me, I got busted smoking a joint in the village when I was 19 or 20 years old. And I spent, maybe a night and a half in jail, so, but I would qualify for a social application, right? I mean, I would, just because I was incarcerated. I'm Puerto Rican, right? So like I check the boxes. So for him, he doesn't feel like those should be on the same plane, which I could understand and respect that, right? But you can't make everyone happy, right? You kind of have to, create a level playing field, because there were people who were incarcerated who, I smell weed. Let me check your pockets. Get in the car. You're going through the system now. So that's happened at scale. So I see his point, but it's kind of hard to rectify that, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to balance those priorities.
You're absolutely right. And to your point, I think what's so interesting, I remember there was a time when we talked about green jobs and green economy. And when you ask somebody to define it, like, you hear 10 different definitions, right? Like, there's no real clarity on it. And when it comes to social equity, it's so interesting because, social equity is the phrase everybody talks about. But in New York, we've really focused on this legacy to legal kind of conversation as well. And what is legacy, right? Because now everybody's legacy, right? If I sold a bag of weed, I'm legacy, yada, yada. And when you talk to those guys, I think this is an important distinction, is like, legacy was like, if you've never been like, had to deal with like the stick up kids trying to rob you, or cops harassing you, or getting beat up, like, that's what legacy was about for these guys, right? And so when they hear guys identify as legacy because they sold one bag, right? Like, there is this tension, right? There's this resentment. It's like, you were not standing on the line. You don't know what it meant to be that. Now, look, the MRTA, which is the name of the law, the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act, has nothing in it, no language about legacy, nothing. It's all about social equity. But if you really look at the language and understand what social equity, how social equity is defined, there's a lot of comparisons for these legacy guys. They've been arrested. They live in communities where the area median income is under 80%, right? Like they fall within a population that was disproportionately impacted. And so, for people like us that understand that law, that understand the language, that want to work with these legacy guys, part of our responsibility is help them craft their narrative, right? Which you've done your whole life with your clients, craft a narrative that fits into the social equity pipeline, right? And that's what we've been trying to do. But like you said, there's a lot of people out there that want to take advantage of that as well. Should they be part of this as well? And that's a really tough. It's so hard.
It's hard. Yeah, you can't make everybody happy. But is there or should there have been, like, if we could go back and rewrite the rules, a fast track for those people who either have or continue to have a successful enterprise in cannabis? Like
a successful like
legacy enterprise, right? I mean, they're running successful businesses. I mean, I call it an enterprise because it's damn near like a Fortune 500 company in many respects. Not all of them, but the ones that I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
I think on face value, the CUARD program is that, right? For those that aren't aware, we created this program for retailers that's rolling out as we speak. We have 4 stores open. Qualifications required that you had an arrest on cannabis. And so some will say that that's the program to fast track it. But taking a step back, when we were still thinking about and negotiating and passing the law, we spent some time engaging legacy folks through their legal representation, right? Because we wanted to protect them. We wanted to be protected as well. And the reality is that we could have given them amnesty from the DA, right? The AG. The problem that we couldn't figure out is how to deal with the IRS and the 280 issue, right? How do you deal with all that money that they earned prior to entering the legal market? They don't have receipts. They don't have books, right? Like, what do you do, right? Like, do you create a flat fee where, like, hey, pay $2-3 million fee and you can come in? Well, that's an obstacle off the jump, right? Because only certain guys are going to be able to get over that hurdle.
True.
You give them a percentage of the gross that they're earning moving forward as like this tax to pay off with, right? Like, so that we wrestled with a lot. But, look, I think 2 things to think about is there should be some type of committee of legacy guys, of other individuals, like not an amnesty committee, but a group of people, a peer-to-peer review group that can sit down with these guys. And look, all those guys need to ask 5 questions, and they can suss out whether or not you were legacy or not, right?
Yep.
But the politics come in is who's on that table, who gets to make that decision, right? And this is where the politics is always at play. But things like that, I think moving forward, I hope states think about how to use the expertise of legacy, the expertise of the people in their states to help identify and suss out who really belongs and who deserves the preferences and considerations, and who should just wait in line like everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. Which I think is a good dovetail to this Michigan applicant lawsuit, man. Which as New Yorkers, right? It's like, but I think the story is right. The person was arrested in New York at one point in time, but they are residents of Michigan. I think it's like, move B, get out the way, man. It's like, again, as a New Yorker, as someone who believes in what we're doing here, you know, it seems so wrong.
It does, but also, again, look across the country, right? Like Illinois was held up for almost 2 years because of lawsuits, right? This is part of the course. Like, people are filling out applications with a lawsuit strategy in mind,
already in mind, right?
Right, and those guys, I'm not surprised if those guys, you know, find a way to settle and get a license out of this whole lawsuit, right? And I think that was their approach to begin with. But understand, for folks that are like listening and being like, why New York's duty was the harm that was created to New Yorkers by the war on drugs. And that's why they created a preference for New Yorkers in this process. Whether that violates some dormant commercial clause or some constitutional issue, that's for the court to decide. But I think New York's intention, I think, was the right intention.
For sure, 100%. But it puts, you know, there are, you know, licensees or applicants, you know, across the state that are waiting for their, you know, they're waiting for this. It's painful, you know.
Yeah. I mean, one of my teams is the Happy Monkey team. I don't know if you know those guys.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
They have multiple, you know, they put in some applications, and, you know, they're just one of many people that have been impacted. I mean, Buffalo, you know, New York, Brooklyn, you know, there's all over the state, you know, people are waiting for this to get figured out. I'm hopeful that OCM and the leadership in the chamber are working diligently to settle this and move this forward, because this is a roadblock to the market. Yeah. And as you know, this could drag out for 2 years if not figured out quicker, right?
All right, and for those applicants, you know, they're sitting on money, losing money, right? They're, you know, it is a painful pain point. Yeah. Let's see, what other questions do we have? I mean, if you could go back again and kind of start over, what would you do differently, if anything,
with the legislation?
Yeah.
Wow, we can go back and start over what we do differently. It's not that we do anything differently. I think, you know, I think when nobody truly understands, because it hasn't been done before in a real way, is what it takes to bring legacy and social equity guys into the market, into a legal market, right? You have some brilliant operators in the legacy space that have never dealt with 280E tax compliance, that have never done traditional marketing and advertising, that have never done complex real estate deals. Right. And so they're going to need legal and technical support to be successful in this market. And that is extremely labor intensive. And I think I think nobody really understood what that meant. And look, that being said, OCM and the state is rolling out mentorship programs. They're rolling out access to free capital. Like I think big picture, they get it. But I think the bigger effort here in a lot of ways is, and I'm learning this now, it's interesting, we're working now with people that won card licenses. Now they have to hire, you know, these auxiliary services that we talked about. And there really isn't an MWBE presence amongst that for that opportunity that we've organized, that we prepared. One of the things that I would have done differently is I would have made sure we had vetted and started to tier MWBE security, lawyers, accountants, construction. Because the biggest, you know, problem now is, like, we're giving these licenses away. They're going to spend millions of dollars on standing up these stores, and the money's going to get siphoned right out of the community because it's going to go to people that don't look like them. And that's not to knock some of the amazing vendors that exist currently in this market. For sure. But we're talking about inclusivity and then totally miss, like, you know, and again, there was so much to do, right? There was so much to get over the finish line. It's like, you know, it's understandable. But now that we're here now, there's a real need, and it's not too late. But almost if we had spent the time before to start vetting, to start bringing that, to start making that as an available pipeline to these guys, I think we'd be furthering the mission that we have our design and intention from day one.
Agree. Yeah, I agree. So, and I mean, we were talking about legacy to legal and sort of what we would do differently. How do we address the issue of all these stores that are popping up? You know, not to throw you a curveball, but I think it's very real. I mean, there are these pop-up shops or legit physical retail stores that are selling all types of stuff. And
Bro, it's a problem.
It's a problem.
These stores, some of these stores are beautiful.
And some of them are beautiful. One's around the corner from my office on Broadway and Bleecker. It's gorgeous, which I know the real estate there isn't cheap either. And I know they're
putting millions of dollars into these spots, right?
Yes.
Look, to your point, I can go down to my bodega shop now and get a dab, right? And 1,500, 2,000 of these stores across New York City alone is the projection. Look, I've been thinking a lot about this because we're sending our people into the compliant market, competing against these guys. Some people might feel that's setting them up for failure, right? Look, it took 20 plus years to take, once we legalized alcohol, to take out the bootlegging and the gray market element. Right? I'm not saying it'll take that long for cannabis, but just as a perspective to keep in mind.
Right.
That being said, New York City does have some precedent that the mayor is aware of, that I've been on the record about, that I think people should keep in mind. And that is, in New York City, down on Canal Street, there was a time that you could go down to Canal Street and walk into a brick and mortar store and buy a knockoff Gucci, Ferragamo, one of those beautiful bags, right? Now, you can still buy those bags out on Canal Street, but when you go down there, somebody shows you a catalog, they take you down an alleyway, and they open up a trunk, and they take out the bag. No more brick and mortar. Why? In early 2000s, Bloomberg, along with the big bag industry, found a public ordinance law in New York City that said if the landlord is aware that their tenants are engaged in the sale of illicit goods, they can be sued up to, and you can sue them $100,000 a day, right? And so the idea, and so to your point, Harrison, because I've seen it happen already, is the task force comes, they seize product, they give the operator a $250 fine. That's all they can give them. Right. And the next day, these guys are up and running.
Right back at it, right.
But start going at the landlord and hitting them with $100,000 fine every day, that's going to change the situation.
They shut that down.
There's also a political look. Eric Adams, our mayor, first black mayor of New York, like the idea of rounding up black and brown people and arresting, like nobody supports that. Right. Nobody wants that to happen. But also, I think it's important to understand these guys that are doing this, like what you're talking about, most of them don't represent the legacy. They don't represent the social equity piece. These are people that are taking advantage of an opportunity.
Right. Profiteers. Yeah.
Total profiteers. I think we have to make that distinction. Because
but we're in the industry, right? So we know those distinctions. We see the issues there, but to the lay person or tourist coming through town, they don't know. They don't know.
And look, the last point I'll make about that is, look, you walk into one of those stores, you buy that product, you're taking a risk, right? Like that product could have E. coli, heavy metals. Mold. We don't know. We don't know what that product has because there's no real COA on that product, right?
Back in the day, though, we would smoke whatever we got, so it's not too different, though.
Thank you for saying that because that's the truth. That is the truth, and I can't allow.
Right, whatever your plug had is what you got,
That's a fact. We have to talk about that too. I appreciate you saying that. But look, we're in a world now where people are so conscious about what they're putting in their bodies.
For sure, 100%,
right? And so, that's a real risk. But you're right. Like I remind my colleagues that, like, guys, while we grew up our whole lives smoking whatever it was, like I had rat poison on it. It probably had some spray. It was like whatever.
Absolutely.
Right. But that, that's the balance. But educated consumers are given an opportunity to make a choice, right? Like, do you want to support the legal guys, pay a little bit more for a product that's clean, or roll the dice, but that's an individual choice, right? And I think as a state and as a city, how we support it's easy. Run a buy legal campaign, right? Because to your point, it's hard to. I have to tell those people these are illegal stores, guys. None of these stores are legal, right? But to the naked eye, they don't know that,
right. And there is a badge though that I think you're supposed to look for, right? If you're looking for a legal licensed operator.
That's right. And people will catch on to that, but that look again, we are in the infant stages of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
The infant, right? Like, and understand in 3 to 4 years, and this, the big boys are going to come in, look at who are the best operators, and they're going to start absorbing, and there's going to be a consolidation of the market. It's inevitable, right? But right now is the time for the little guy, and New York was really intentional about this in ways that other states weren't. Day one, the little guy's getting a head start. They're getting an opportunity to get into this market, make their place, and build quality brands, quality infrastructure, quality companies. And I think that's amazing. I can't wait to see what creative New Yorkers come up with.
we're hustlers. We're born that way. It's in the water or wherever it comes from. But yeah, we're natural hustlers.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, it is exciting. Any last minute? We're coming up on time here. But any last minute thoughts or points you want to make before we wrap things up?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, man. Another fellow New Yorker, Brooklyn guy, man. You got your swag, man. I love it. I love hearing that Brooklyn accent come out.
Thanks, bro.
Look, everyone, thank you so much for listening. You can hit me on my social media, but also, you guys, we really believe in the concept that the people that were most impacted and harmed by the war on drugs should benefit from the wealth creation of that same industry being commercialized. Like, New York State is committed to that. It's not going to happen overnight. Stay the course, believe in, keep the faith. And I tell you, my prediction is that by the summer, nobody's going to remember this stuff they're talking about now. Right? This market's going to look very different. We're going to have supply, some amazing product. We're going to have an expanded infrastructure, and this is all going to be old news, right? So just hold on, wait a little, and stay tuned. You're going to like what you see. I promise. I guarantee it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jesse, for joining us, and thank you for tuning into The Edge. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
Thank you again.